Okay, so are you able to see the links page, everyone?
Yes.
All right, great. So this is the one I was telling you about that has the links on it, that will be able to access. Everyone who has the link to the slide deck can access this. And then the second slide is for Q&A. So feel free to type anything in there at any point. We have a couple of staff folks who will keep an eye on it and call us out if we have to respond to any questions. And with that, I'll go ahead and launch into our presentation. So I'm glad to have everyone here with us today. We're going to be covering community engagement results and the strategy prioritization. So let me hand it over to Wendy to go over the agenda and objectives.
Okay, sure. So this morning, the first thing we'll do is our settling in and ground rules, as we've done before every meeting. Then we'll go through the community engagement results that came from our surveys that we had out for the last couple of months. We'll go over a VCU equity assessment that was done for our office. Then we're going to get into the prioritization on what is going to get us to our 2030 goals. And then we'll have wrap up and next steps. So the objectives for today are to understand the community feedback from our draft strategies and how will that inform the next steps that we need to take, and then also agree on a prioritization scheme for the strategies to see, how can we stratify these, which ones rise to the top, and what should we elevate as we move forward. So again, our ground rules, they're the same ones we've had all the time. So you already know these, so I won't go through each of them. But anyway, just remember to be respectful, share your ideas. And, if we don't hear anything, if there's a long silent pause after 7 seconds or so, we will move on.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the process overview, just to remind everyone, we are steadily moving along our timeline here. We're in the plan development phase of developing and refining strategies today. And then next we'll be creating the implementation framework and metrics. So it's nice to see that we're making lots of progress. And just to kind of reorient you to this draft structure that we've developed together, we've made our way all the way through the goals and the vision, the community priorities, the pathways, the objectives, and the strategies. And so now we are going to be talking about finalizing those strategies today and then moving into the implementation plans over the summer. And that's, how are we going to implement, measure progress, and ensure accountability in this plan? Okay, so this summer, this will go into a little more detail. Today is the community engagement and feedback. We'll be telling you the results of the 10 and 30-minute surveys, and then the direct response to the draft vision, objectives, and strategies. Today, we're going to talk about prioritization and the next steps that are involved in everything that we're going to be doing over the summer, so you can really get a sense of how much further we need to develop the strategies. And so next time we meet will be on June 16th, and that's where we'll talk about the indicators and impacts. So what is our shared understanding of what is achievable? What does success look like for each of these strategies? What are the indicators that we're going to use to measure the success of those objectives? And then the meetings in July and August will cover the implementation and accountability. So that's specifically, how will we equitably implement the plan? How will we ensure accountability and transparency in implementation? Okay, so on to community engagement results. We had a very exciting community engagement period, and we shared the work that you all have been developing over many months in all these working groups through several avenues. And we got responses from almost 500 Richmonders. So I want to thank you for everything you did to help share our work through the newsletter and all of your own channels. So each of these avenues that we went down, the surveys and the strategies on the Conveyo document, reached different different folks. And so we're going to share those responses with you next. And just know that each of those tools and each of those feedback responses are going to be used as resources for further plan development throughout this summer. So we'll be showing you how we're incorporating those responses. And if you want to go to the RVAgreen2050.com website, that's where we'll have lots of specifics on updates to engagement. Also, the newsletter that's going to be coming out, I believe sometime tomorrow, is going to have some more specifics for you to take a look at. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Wendy to talk about the overview of engagement and the demographics that we touched.
Okay, sure. So on this slide, we've got a map of our city of Richmond broken out into the different census tracts. And so first of all, we want to thank all of you for helping generate interest in the plan and trying to get the word out to the different communities that you interact with and trying to engage folks on via social media and that type of thing. So overall, our survey got 495 responses, as Don said, almost 100. So we had 74 paper responses. We had 199 people who did the 10-minute survey. We had 192 people did our 30-minute survey, and then we had 30 people who used the Conveyo document. So then what happened with that information was that Kyla Logan in our office, who does all of our GIS mapping, we had the survey geotagged so that as people took the survey, we could see where they lived in the city of Richmond. And that would enable us to try and get outreach to some of the communities that we weren't hearing from and that we wanted to get responses from. So you can see, the darker blue colors are where we got the most responses from, and then down into the lighter blue colors. But we were really trying to get and drive responses from those communities that in particular that we're trying to reach out to that haven't been reached before. So this is kind of the first time I think that the cities actually use this type of mapping in an engagement process. So that we could monitor that and try and, again, target our outreach. And let's see, unless there are any questions on that, Dawn will get back into the specific feedback of how this all came together.
Any questions on the demographics map? It was a pretty interesting process to be able to monitor week to week who we were reaching. Okay. So on to the survey feedback. We offered a 30-minute survey, and the question was, which of these are most important to help you achieve, or to help achieve your vision for a climate neutral and climate resilient Richmond by 2030? So this is the order that they ranked them in by strategy bucket. The top 13, there were 51 total strategy buckets, and these were the top 13. Those results were then used to prioritize the level of community support that was used in the ranking matrix that we'll get to in a little bit. And so it told us what's most important to Richmonders at this point. Okay. So specific to buildings and energy, this is how your strategy buckets ranked. You can see that at the top, we have community solar, government relations, residential energy efficiency, and green building and building codes, all the way down to electrification was closer to the bottom. Buildings and energy it's a tough one to gauge community support because there's such a steep learning curve. And so a lot of this is really technical. So I think what was interesting, the things that rose to the top of the list were green spaces and trees and air quality, things that people are already familiar with. So that's something to keep in mind as we're moving forward. We do have some education when it comes to buildings and energy, some work ahead of us. Okay, so just to remind you what the Conveyo document looked like, we put all of our strategies out on an interactive PDF that was accessible online. And so we had almost 200 comments on the strategies where people actually clicked on them and typed in specific comments. Some of them were ways to make it better? Had we thought of this or that? Way to go, I really like this. Or, you know, whatever the feedback was, this was just a great way to really get people involved in our work. And so what we did with that is each of these comments associated with our strategies, staff went through and responded to them. So we have this document, there's a link to it on the website, and it'll be linked from the newsletter as well, so that the folks who took their time to go in and comment on our strategies can see how we're addressing those, whether we're taking these ideas for further planned implementation, or maybe it's already being addressed in a different part of the plan. So, or interesting idea, you know, just any kind of response. This is our way of being transparent and making sure that everyone knows how much we appreciate their input and feedback on our work. So that's the external response. Internally, we took all of those responses and we divided them up into these different, are they recommending some kind of milestone or indicator or way to an activity to further develop the strategy that we will want to consider down the road? Is there a suggestion for financing? Is it just community support? So should this be counted towards the scoring for how much the community is behind this strategy? Is it a recommended new strategy? Is it relating to an existing strategy? Is there a revision of strategy language we might want to consider, or an innovative new concept? So this is, just so you know, this is a tool that we now have to move forward to continue to build out our strategies. Any questions on that? Okay. So now I'm going to hand it over to David Sale to introduce this VCU equity assessment. This was kind of it was an opportunity to continue on this learning journey by getting some outside, an outside assessment on the equity, the work going on in our process. So David, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Dawn. So like Dawn mentioned, the equity assessment was the office's work to continue its goals to be transparent and accountable, and also make sure that the process is as equitable as possible moving forward. And so this class of VCU grad students interviewed city staff, roundtable members, facilitators of the roundtable as well, to sort of understand what the goals for this process in terms of equity were from the onset, and how well the office was sort of adhering to those goals throughout the process thus far. So after those interviews, the class sort of triangulated that with best practices in equitable climate action planning to see what the office could do moving forward to continue to center equity as much as possible. And so the results have already been shared with the roundtable. These are just a few example recommendations that have more to do with the working groups. So things like increasing diversity of the working groups to the extent possible. When we're thinking about implementation, looking at equity-related indicators as well as resilience and adaptation-related indicators are some things to sort of keep in mind moving forward. And I know that staff from the office are happy to talk through this in more detail. If anyone has any questions or wants to see the report or anything, they can definitely reach out. So yeah, I will turn it back over to you, Dawn.
Thanks, David. Yeah, this is just a great reminder to everyone that equity really is centered in our work. We're going to be digging into our strategies now, and want to remember that as we continue to get technical and develop the activities, we really need to make sure that equity is centered in every step of the process. So if anyone wants to talk to staff or learn more about this study and the findings, please reach out to us at any time. Are there any questions on that at this point? Okay. So now we're going to move into prioritization, and this is a really intense kind of a speed study, or speedy way of blowing through a lot of work that was done. So please stop me if you have any questions as I launch into this work. Okay, so why do we need to prioritize? Well, across the 5 pathways, we had 188 strategies. That is a lot. That is a lot to manage, a lot to develop, a lot to implement, and a lot to track. So we really needed to go back and figure out what is it that what's going to most help us realize our values and achieve our objectives. Obviously, we want to be successful, want to set ourselves up for success, and we have a short time frame. Our first roadmap is to accomplish a 45% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. So we had to really look at the methodologies and which are going to get us there. And then, of course, we have the long-term goals of a carbon neutral, resilient, and equitable Richmond by 2050. So keeping all of that in mind, and the fact that we do have timelines and limited available resources and limited capacity, how can we best set ourselves up for success? And just to remind you, anything that's not, or to let you know, anything that is not prioritized moving forward, it doesn't mean we're losing all that great work. It just is going to exist probably in some kind of appendix that we would update year to year, or it's work that's already being done in other departments, and it just won't be it won't be this group's responsibility to implement and manage and track. So nothing is being lost. All right, so this is how we quantified the impacts of our strategies. We went through the high, medium, and low ratings of the strategies when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. So we had a score. Low was we gave it a 1. If it was a medium impact on emissions reductions, it had a 3, and if it was a high, then it got a 5. And same with the potential climate resilience impacts of extreme heat, severe weather, flooding, and community resilience. You can see the definitions on this slide. And then the equity, each of those 7 community priorities also had ratings of high, medium, and low. And so we also worked, so staff and consultants looked at each strategy to assign a value based on modeling and prior experience and expertise in the field, looked at a lot of after we gave these high, mediums, and lows, how were they going to be weighted relative to each other? You know, is one going to be weighted higher or lower? Should they all be equal? And so we took those scores and we took it to the round table, and they reviewed the weights associated with each criteria and then provided feedback to us to make sure that the prioritization scoring reflects our equity-centered values appropriately. So you can see here that there's an impact score made up of greenhouse gas impacts, resilience, feasibility, cost effectiveness, the community support rankings from the 30-minute survey, and then economic development, as in the number of jobs created and sustained. So each of those were weighted to come up with an impact score. And then we have an equity score, which with each of the priorities, and they were weighted. So then once we came up with that, we thought, well, okay, how are we going to actually build something that we can start whittling away at? So this is just a snippet of the strategy prioritization matrix. So all 188 strategies are in here. They were all given scores and then weighted to get an impact score and an equity score, and then combined, and then we ran the percentiles. So if you want to dig into that a little more, there is a link to a Google version of this, so you can take a look at it. So then once we came up with that, we thought, well, what's the methodology going to be for combining these scores and then sorting it? Because, you know, the more you dig into it, the more you realize that you really have to be able to explain your methodologies and make sure that we are representing the values of our work correctly. So the first version was looking at sorting the impact score first and then taking a look at equity, but we found that that just looked like a traditional climate action plan. Resilience wasn't prioritized and equity was not centered. So then we sorted by equity and thought maybe we could inform which ones where we draw that line by the impact score. But that looked more like a resilience plan. We weren't necessarily going to get to our our carbon reductions by sorting it that way. So then we took the top impact scores and the top equity scores and just looked for ones that were on both lists. And that was too limiting. We just didn't have enough strategies that would allow us to reach our goals. So then finally, when we took the impact score and we combined it with the equity score, and then we sorted it by percentile, we saw that that was really representing what we wanted to get at. It was not too hot, not too cold, just right. So this is what it looks like. Again, this visual on the right, you've seen many times, and that's what kept going through our heads. You know, we wanted whatever this breakdown was going to be to truly represent that equity-centered process where all of the strategies had climate resilience components and a significant climate action. Wendy, did you have to
move forward one slide? You need to move.
Oh, there you go. Sorry. Yes. So this is what it looked like. The top 75th percentile strategies by objective with this visual in mind that I was just describing, equity centered with climate action and resilience components. If you took the top 75th percentile broken down by pathway and objective, you can see where we landed. So what each working group is now doing this week is taking their specific objectives and then deciding, having conversations about, are we comfortable with this? Do we need to combine them somehow? Are we okay with the ones that didn't make the cut? All of that good stuff, which we'll get to in our activity in just a minute. So any questions at this point on the methodology and the breakdown?
Nope.
Clear as a bell. Great. Love it. Okay, so then I wanted to show you next. This is an example of some of the buildings and energy strategies that rose to the top. The top three ones were solar installations, energy efficiency assistance, and ground-mounted solar. So clearly those great strategies, we're going to move forward with those among others. But some of the ones that didn't quite make it up there were green roofs, methane leakage, and enforcement, training building inspectors. So when you go into the breakouts and start talking about these strategies, you'll want to look at training building inspectors and cultivate the department's capacity to enforce letter and spirit of current building code provisions. So maybe there's some way that one could be an activity that relates to building codes. It doesn't mean it's going to be lost, but we want to rethink how to organize these in a way that we can be successful and reduce the amount of strategies that we're ultimately going to end up with.
Dawn, can I jump in real quick?
Yes.
And this may come up later. I just throwing it out there. I mean, one other lens to me that's always critical is actionability. Which can be acted on immediately. Which are no cost, which use available resources. So maybe you've factored that in somewhere. I just wanted to throw that out.
That's a great point. And let me go back to this. So feasibility is the criteria that looked at the barriers and amount of financial and political capital required. And that scoring was, so Greenlink Consultants helped us come up with that, because they have so much experience with other cities and best practices, and they're the ones digging through the numbers behind the scenes. So that was really important to us. That's why it got a weight of 4.
And cost effectiveness is
exactly
hand in glove. Yeah, great.
Yep, same cost effectiveness. Really, in order to get these approved and passed, we need to make sure that we don't have barrier. We're setting ourselves up for success in those areas as well. It's a great point. Thank you for asking the question. And then when it comes to the actual strategies, you might find that what we learned in the environment group on Monday, at least, and again, these are different working groups, so I haven't even looked at ours through this lens. You guys are going to be doing that. But what I found in environment, or what they found, was that a lot of the ones that rose to the top were like, plan to do this, develop a framework for this or that. And they weren't necessarily the action items that Andrew was just referring to. There might be some specific action items that didn't make the cut that could be included in the plan development. So just pay attention to that, because that's going to go, the next meeting we have is when we talk about the specific indicators. What are we measuring? How are we going to rate our progress? So each of these exercises is going to lead into the next step. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and pause for just a second to make sure that I've covered everything okay. Does anyone have a question or a point of clarification to make? Okay, so I'm going to be setting up breakout rooms, and Wendy's going to introduce the activity, and then we're going to go into a 5-minute break. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Wendy.
Okay, sure. So what we're going to do for our activity today is we're going to spend 1 hour. We're going to be split up into 3 breakout groups. And each breakout group is going to go through each of our 4 objectives and spend 15 minutes on each of those. So that'll make up our hour. And what we'll do is take a look at the strategies and how they came out on the scoring with the impact and the equity scores, and look at the ones that made the cut. Make sure that those seem like the right ones that should be up there. And we need to keep in mind that our first goal is to reduce our carbon emissions by 45% by 2030. So we're looking at a 10-year kind of time horizon in this activity. Like we've had in some of our other activities, we'll have some stars and X's down at the bottom of the Google Doc, and you can move those around to the ones that you like or don't like. And as we move through the exercise, as other groups put their comments on, you can maybe put X's or stars next to the comments of some of the other working group members. We need to decide, if you're comfortable with the number of strategies that need to be prioritized. Can we commit to making sure that they'll be successful if we put them in place? And does it make sense to include the strategy within our 2030 timeline goal? So again, that 10-year time frame, and it might be that we need to modify a strategy or combine or something like that. So anyway, those are the sort of things that you all will be looking at. And again, we'll move through each of our 4 objectives. We'll spend 15 minutes on each one, go through the specific strategies for that objective, and make our comments and discuss. And then we'll just keep moving through. We'll stay in the same breakout group the whole time, but we'll just move to a different objective every 15 minutes. So if you haven't already been able to go ahead and load up the Google Doc activity sheet, I believe David's put it there in the chat, and it also was on the email that Dawn sent out this morning, and it's on the first slide in the slide deck if you're on that. So go ahead and make sure you've got that up and ready on your device, whatever you have. Hopefully it's a laptop or computer screen. It's a little harder to do this on just a cell phone. So if you have that ready, and after we take our break, we'll go ahead and launch into our breakout groups, and then we'll spend the next hour going through that. So let's see, anything else I need to add, Dawn, while you're working on it? No.
I don't think so. Any questions?
Okay. So let's see, I know it's 11:36. Do we want to do a 4-minute break and come back at 11?
Let's come back at 11:45.
11:45, okay.
Or I guess, yeah, if that's okay. And that'll give me time to make sure that we have the breakout set up. And then And then at the end, we'll just be coming back to kind of wrap up and send you on your way. So go ahead and take a break, and we'll launch you into the rooms at 11:45.
All right, see you then.
Okay, thanks. All right, so as folks are coming back, I am getting the rooms set up. At the top of your screen, you're going to see two buttons. One is leave. That means leave the meeting. And then you'll have to log back in to come back. The other one, if you want to return to the main, I'm going to be in the main room with my group, and Wendy's going to be in room 1, and then David will be in room 2. But if you need to come back to room 1 at any point, you can leave your breakout. But just pay attention because these controls are different from Teams. There's going to be a 1 hour. I'm sorry, from Zoom. There's a 1 hour time limit. So your facilitator is just going to keep an eye on the clock and move you to the objectives. And when you go into your breakouts, each facilitator can kind of make sure everyone can see the same thing, and will reorient you to the activity. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the breakout rooms. And this is my
Sounds like Doris Day.
Joe Sarver, Jeanette, Alexis, Irina, and Giovanni. And then there's an unknown user. I'm not sure who that is, but those of you who are left are going to be with me. So if you want to go ahead and if you are, I know we're all busy, we're all doing millions of different things, but if you want to come onto the camera so we can just say hi to each other, because we're gonna have a little bit of an interactive conversation if we're able to. Hey, Giovanni, how are you?
Hey, I'm good.
Hey, good.
I'm the lunch lady right now too.
Okay, I know this is middle of the day. Everyone's got a million things going on, but I just wanted to see all your beautiful faces and say hello to you. So we have Giovanni from the round table. We have Joe from RRHA, Richmond. What is it?
Morning.
Redevelopment Housing Authority. We have Jeanette from the schools. Bob Stone is our engineer, city engineer, DPU. Kendra from our office, you know her. And then Alexis and Maeve are interning with us. And Irina is our co-facilitator for our, what is your title? You have a title. She's one of our leaders. And so Maeve, I was going to send you with Wendy since you are helping her. Let me see if I can do that. But first of all, I want to make sure you all have the Google document open. So it looks like this. You all have that on your own?
Yep.
Okay. So we're going to start with objective 1. I'm pretty sure I'm objective 1, right? Yes. And we have 15 minutes to talk about it. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to just read through this, and just to kind of reorient you. The ones in green above the line made the cut. They were in the top 75th percentile for combined scoring. The ones below did not. Are we comfortable with that? Can we let them go? Or do you feel strongly that we need to reconsider that? So at the very bottom, there are stars and X's. If you're comfortable with the ones that went away, please drag the X's up. It's nice to know if we kind of have a general sense that that's okay. And then if the stars are obviously for support. The questions that if you want to kind of remind yourself at the top in yellow, this objective is the one that's achieve climate neutrality and increase resilience in government buildings, infrastructure, and operations. And then so you can put your stars and X's on the left under working group reaction, and then over on the far right under notes, if you want to add some context, like your thoughts on these, please do that there. But definitely want to give you some time to look through these, and then we can speak up at any time. This is just an opportunity to bounce ideas off each other.
And Dawn, just confirming, we need to narrow this down to the top 4?
So it's not a number. Yes, I think 4 is a nice number, but it's which ones are most impactful. Now, buildings and energy, this is where we're going to really reduce our carbon footprint. So these are important strategies to consider, especially if they're high ranking in this impact percentile. Those are shaded in the impact percentile column if they made the cut amongst the highest. And then the combined percentile is where we drew the line, though, above 75th percentile. But you'll see down here, like this climate projections contracts, that has the potential to make a big impact on emissions reductions, but it didn't necessarily have a very high equity percentile. So it didn't make the cut. Okay.
Can I also ask, I'm just looking at the impact score and the impact percentile. Thinking about, I'm just converting this into something maybe that I understand better, but let's say if we were talking about strictly energy usage. So let's say we were comparing the energy usage impact of something that uses 5 megawatts, but is in the 95th percentile of potential energy savings. Comparing that to something that could save 500 megawatts, but is only in the 50th percentile for potential savings. How do you interpret that? Or, could you tell me what like just looking at the first one, what do we mean by impact percentile?
Okay, so when we're looking at the impact percentile, remember that's not just greenhouse gas, it's also resilience, and it's also, so that other matrix,
right.
That had, this is where we actually had the scoring for each criteria.
Okay, right.
So they were weighted against each other to come up with the total. Now, I will tell you, for greenhouse gases, the high, medium, and low, most of the buildings and energy are fairly high. For if we're talking environment or community, most of those strategies are low. So yeah, greenhouse gas emissions is generally pretty high in most of the buildings.
Okay,
strategy.
thank you.
Mm-hmm. Everyone able to open this Google Sheet? Because if not, you can look at my screen and then I can type for you if you have comments.
So the climate projections under government operations, it made the cut on the impact, but not on the equity. So would that be something that would still be alive? Because I would think that you would want to track your usage to determine if you're improving, right?
Yep. Great catch. I saw that when I was looking at these too. Staff did not do any moving around of anything at this point. This is just where they fell. But it's interesting that the line came right between those two, because obviously you're going to have to track if you're going to be planning. Now, the one piece of that one that didn't make the cut, create departmental protocol with KPIs early. That's a lot of work. So maybe there's kind of a different version of tracking that we could roll into the planning that isn't quite as invasive or, hard to manage. Go ahead and type in your thoughts to the right under notes and drag any of your X's or stars up to reflect your thinking.
This is Joe weighing in. I can't add any comments. I've got the spreadsheet open on my desktop, but I'm in the meeting on my phone. So
okay.
But the one with the climate projections contracts, I don't really know how we can move forward without reducing the city's municipal buildings from fossil fuel dependence through agreements and contracts.
Okay.
I realize it has a lower equity score, but I just don't know how we can move forward without that.
So you're saying that you think that's important, that we should include that one?
Critical.
Okay.
But my 2 cents.
Okay.
Which one was that again?
Climate projections contracts, the phasing out of fossil fuel dependence through agreements and contracts for the city,
So,
mainly municipal buildings.
And I definitely agree with that. It's tough to try to limit them to 4, but the first one, switching between screens, the first one to me, I don't want to say, the strategy is LED street lights. I'm not going to say it's not as important, but I think it's by far not as important as some of these others. So I think that's where by putting that red star there, I don't want to say it's not important, but I think that it can be substituted for something else a little more of higher importance, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a great point. So it's not that we're limiting it to 4. We're actually limiting it. We drew the line at anything that rose above the 75th percentile. And
Right.
So those 4 at the top happen to be above the 75th percentile. The ones below it are the ones that didn't score high, but maybe they are important. So, so which one were you just talking about that you thought might be more important than LED streetlights?
Well, I have a few of them. I'm trying to move stars.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So on the LED streetlight one, and on the stars, I can see how it's kind of tricky you have to click on it first to get the blue square around it and then drag it up. So
I had to actually copy paste it.
I think that's what I do too. It just seems a little easier that way.
It's not dragging for me. So
if you click on it to make the blue square around it and then click on it again.
Well, you click on it and hit edit up at the top and go to copy, old school, and then put it where you want it and then hit paste.
Okay. On the LED streetlights, that's a good example though. The city is already doing that. It's just, kind of being done. It's not something that like our office is trying to stay on top of it and track and all of those things, but because it's being done by a different department, just I think as funding is available, it's not necessarily something that if it was included in our plan, then we would be on top of it, and we would maybe be even more aggressive in making sure that all the neighborhoods are being equitably, brought in sooner. That's just an example of one. But if we didn't include it in the plan, it's not that they're not already being converted. It's just not something that we would be tracking and urging.
I actually, sorry to jump in, but that one jumped out to me as well. And I guess I'm just questioning the equity percentile. I mean, having streetlights in neighborhoods, if we're talking about, there being more streetlights put in historically disenfranchised neighborhoods, that's one thing. But like last year, my car was broken into a bunch of times because the street light was out in the alley behind my house. And the equity, or the thing that I really cared about is I want there to be a street light here. So it doesn't really seem to me that swapping out regular streetlights for LED streetlights would do a whole lot for equity, since the greenhouse gas emissions associated with that electricity aren't necessarily being made in those neighborhoods to begin with. But that's just my opinion.
Yep, and that is a great point. So there's a lot of streetlights. It is such a massive undertaking to manage them. A lot of times cities are paying for lights that have been out for months, or there are, there is some program where they're supposed to be upgraded and they're not. So it's more like it's an opportunity for equity. And if we were able to work more closely with the utility and with the street lighting department and really look at the neighborhoods that need them and align this strategy along with maybe a sidewalk transportation strategy, there's just a lot of opportunity to make that very equitable and make sure that the neighborhoods that don't have sufficient lighting right now are addressed first.
Right.
So,
right.
I might add streetlights a little trickier in Richmond too, because big portions of South Richmond, the streetlights are owned and maintained by Dominion, not the city. So it's kind of a different game there. Whereas,
but Dominion too is converting to LED, so that just means that we would not only be managing the ones that the city is responsible for, but also working with Dominion on the others.
Yeah.
Well,
and historically, they've typically been less responsive than in repairing lights than the city-owned crews.
Well, so I was in a second district meeting maybe last year or the year before, and then the then head of DPU said that doing anything with streetlights was just really, really difficult because the city only had one streetlight technician, pays them $35,000 a year. The second they hire and train somebody, Dominion then hires them and pays them $70,000 a year. So, let's say if we were to say this LED streetlights item was our very top priority, that just goes to city council. City council approves it, and then city council figures out, we'll see what we can do to make this happen. So then city council, or then DPU would figure out like, okay, is it that we need to hire more people or pay the ones we have more or get more materials? Is that how that works?
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. I think they've been trying to use contractors to do that, whereas maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, they had a more robust set of city crews. But you're right. I guess we haven't been competitive in terms of, salaries and benefits for keeping, qualified power line technicians. They can just make more money and, working for power companies. But
so we probably need to move on to the next objective. if you want to kind of wrap up your thoughts here, and we will keep this going for the rest of the week, so you can revisit this the next couple days. But go ahead and enter your comments, and then we're going to click on Objective 2 in the tab at the bottom.
Hey, I just have one other question on the resilient infrastructure.
Sure.
Just need some clarity here. Is that only for municipal buildings, the risk assessment, or would that apply to all buildings, including housing?
Public housing would be included in that. Anything that the city manages or has some control over.
Okay, but would not include privatized housing, private homes. Okay.
No, it'd be nice to provide some guidance there, but that's not something that we would have the ability to manage.
Right, because that is not, and I know you want to move on, but that's another one that, in my mind, is critical to try to control emissions.
On the private side?
Yeah, both sides, yeah, but everything.
Okay.
Public and private.
Okay, great. All right, so Objective 2 is do this maximize energy efficiency, performance, and resilience in all existing buildings. And so you can see, looks like someone didn't like the first one. They want us to rewrite it. But the ones that made the cut are above the green line. Ones that didn't are below. Hey, Michael, I see you're able to join us.
Yeah, hi. Sorry I'm late.
That's okay. Just want to kind of orient you to what we're doing. I'm not sure how long you've been listening in, but want to make sure that you have access to this.
I do. I just opened the agenda and now I'm going to try and open the document you're looking at.
Okay.
So that I can catch up. Figure out what's wrong with, what was the objection about the top one?
All right. So, yeah, Objective 2, they're saying that energy efficiency assistance, which says aid households that have the highest energy burden with energy efficiency upgrades through community-based programs, advocacy partnerships, and residential PACE. So someone says, can we rewrite this? Aid all households with energy efficiency upgrades through community-based programs, advocacy partnerships, low, no-cost financial options, starting with a no-cost professional energy audit and connecting to upgrade options, either subsidized by RGGI or WAPS or finance. I'm going to say that those are all great ideas, and we don't necessarily have to rewrite the strategy, but we can add those to further strategy development in the coming meetings, because each one of these that we move forward with today, we're gonna be getting into the weeds on. That's when we really figure out, okay, what are we measuring? What are the indicators to measure success? What are the impacts of each of these strategies? Who needs to be involved? Who's going to be accountable for it? Who is, what does the ownership of this strategy look like?
Yeah, it sounds more like, yes and than a no but.
Yeah,
First,
I agree.
Yes, and we'll do this stuff.
Mhm. Down at the bottom, I encourage you to click on it, an X, the red X, until there's a blue square around it, and then you click on it again, and you can drag it up to the working group reaction cells. And those are the ones where, these things might already be going on, like the energy code adoption. I mean, all these things are already happening out there, but maybe they're just not going to be managed by our community-owned plan. So, if you're okay with letting it go ahead and drag the star. Now, one that I really want to see added back in is that commercial energy efficiency, the performance standards that says require an equitable building performance standard for existing commercial buildings over 5,000 square feet. I think that one's really important to get in the works, but that's just me.
So for the second item, oh gosh, where did it go? Promote the benefits of electric-only commercial and residential retrofits by sharing targeted case studies. Are there any more teeth to that item? Or
which one are we looking at?
Clean energy, electrification.
Oh, what the
It's like
benefits
row
of
5.
Yeah, promote the benefits of electric-only commercial and residential retrofits by sharing targeted case studies. So at this point, that is that a strategy that is important? And if so, then we'll be building on it in the coming months and adding the teeth. And maybe it makes sense to combine that with another strategy.
Dawn, this is Joe.
Sure.
On the refrigerant recycling piece, the carbon capture, that is something that is being controlled by the trade. it may be less critical for to be part of the this plan.
Great. I appreciate you saying that. I think that we could.
I mean, it's already being controlled now, and I would imagine the controls will become more stringent over time.
Mm-hmm.
I actually just put a note there. It was announced maybe 2 weeks ago. The State Air Pollution Control Board had a vote on phasing out HFC production, distribution, all of that. So there's already a plan. It's already in the works. It's going to happen regardless. So I would say let's, if we can only have a few items, since we know that's going to happen, then let's not make that one of our top items.
Thank you. That's great to know.
Yeah, I agree.
I put a star next to equitable thermal comfort. But I just wanted to say I think that's really, really important. We only have 2 of the top items are high on the equity percentile, but I think equitable thermal comfort captures a lot of different things. And, like when you plant trees, you have different kinds of benefits, co-benefits. Same thing with, residential cooling relief, and all of that. So I think that's something that would probably give us a pretty big bang for our buck.
Yeah, great point. Thank you.
And I would second that. Especially from a public housing perspective, I would hope that the public housing stock is changed out before 2050, which would maybe alleviate some of these thermal comfort issues. But right now, it's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Well, right. And I mean, even if the housing stock isn't switched out, which I agree with you, I hope it really is. When I've been walking by Gilpin, they have all these big pine trees, like really tall pine trees that don't really provide much in the way of shade. And there's so much space that trees could be planted in. There's a lot that could be done even with the existing grounds, just planting trees by bus stops.
All right, well, I think it's time to move on to objective 3. If you want to click that tab at the bottom, that one is ensure all Richmonders have equitable access to affordable and renewable clean energy. You can see the top 4 in green that made the cut and the bottom 3 did not. Like everyone thinks they're all important. Is there a way, maybe you can help me think, is there a way to combine any of these that would make better sense so we don't have so many individual strategies?
Well, there's 3 community solars. 4, sorry.
It seems like one impediment to combining is that each one has just one sentence and some of the sentences are long. And that's kind of artificial, like I think we could combine them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting for us to look at it this way. We've been developing, and now that we can see them together, it's like, wait a minute, why did we do that? Let's rethink this layout.
I mean, just read, so one is, incentives for community solar. Another one is, reducing impediments by reviewing zoning ordinances. And what's the third one? I don't know. Increase funding for microgrids. It's all one thing,
Mm-hmm.
Those are tactics.
Encourage community solar through reviewing zoning restrictions, incentivizing opportunities, and increasing funding for microgrids.
Yep.
I think the final item is really important, the workforce development. I'm wondering, so is it Parks and Rec? They're doing a workforce development thing, training folks. You know, they have various AmeriCorps positions and other workforce development programs where they're training people on tree care. You know, anticipating that there are going to be more trees and opportunities to care for our trees in the future. But is there a way to incorporate that into the workforce development piece as well? I think there's more training programs than just solar weatherization and energy efficiency, but I think whatever we can put in there is really, really important.
Yeah, I agree. And federal funding probably, you know, for Conservation Corps is,
yeah,
you know, we're hoping.
Well, right. And I mean, we can plant all the trees we want, but if we don't have people to take care of them, prune them, water them, then, you know, why are we planting the trees? Because, you know, we just wasted our money.
I would have to say, from a maintenance standpoint, I have a love-hate relationship with trees.
Oh, I know.
Because they can create problems, you know, with building structures and things like that. So power grid, all that. So.
Well, we just applied for a grant in Jackson Ward, and I actually walked around the neighborhood with two folks from Department of Forestry, because, you know, and they don't usually do that for grants, but they know the tree wells are so small and the buildings are so close that, you know, these folks are trained in choosing the right tree for the right place. And that's the kind of thing that workforce development would help, you know, if you had folks who really knew, you know, yes, this is a good place for a tree, or no, it's not.
People who knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the strategy for planning is important.
Right, not planting pin oaks under power lines and things like that. Because there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
Well, if there aren't any more thoughts on this one and you guys want to jump ahead to objective 4, we can do that. Or go back to any of the others. Objective 4, it says achieve climate neutrality and maximize resilience in all new buildings. The only one that made the cut was the financing of green buildings. So I want to look at the others and think about if any of those are important enough to move back in. Someone asked about solar readiness. Curious as to why that one had a 0. Since marginalized communities are often cost burdened by utilities, I would think this would have a big impact. So when the folks were going through the community priorities, they thought that have a solar readiness requirement for all new buildings did not seem to, it just had a low impact for racial equity, health and well-being, government accountability, community wealth, housing and buildings, neighborhoods, and engagement and communications. So it had a low score, which is why it fell at the bottom of the percentile ranking. But that doesn't mean that, you know, maybe we could add some language back into that strategy to make it more equitable, and maybe it would even roll back up under something else. So if you have any ideas on how to make this one a little meatier, more equitable, then please add those thoughts in the notes.
So all of these got a 26 equity score, which put them in the 0 percentile.
Yep.
The whole list.
Those 4, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess the feeling is that, I don't know. I don't know why, but it may be that, you know, new construction or, you know, fixing infrastructure and stuff is perceived not to apply to lower income neighborhoods. I don't know why I got such a low equity score.
Kendra, I think you might be on this call. I'm not sure. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on those equity scores. I don't even know if you're here. Or Giovanni.
What was the question?
So on this, on some of these, like building codes, net zero energy design guidelines, solar readiness, and utility resilience, they only had 1s across all of the community priorities. So they got a really low equity score. And so just wondering if you have any thoughts on why those would rate so low on equity.
I have no thoughts on that because Brianne did the ranking, so she walked through the process. I would have to look at the framework to really have any sort of feedback on
that. And Michael was just suggesting that maybe the thought is that, you know, this is new construction, who would be benefiting from these new construction design guidelines or solar readiness. Maybe we don't.
Maybe it doesn't sound like it applies to me, to some of our community partners. But to me, a lot of these things are, why wouldn't we advocate in the legislature to do this? I mean, there's no harm to doing that, you know?
Yeah. Especially if we were going to have new, you know, low-income housing or public housing that had new design standards, right?
Yeah, exactly. It sort of confounds me that I'm just guessing that it just didn't resonate. It didn't sound like it applies to me, to some of our partners, you know?
Yeah.
So they're all accumulating stars.
Well, we have 15 more minutes in this activity, so if you guys want to just look at any of the objectives and ask any questions or bounce up any thoughts. What's going to have to happen between this meeting and the next one is that staff is going to have to go back in and rethink how to organize these. So any assistance that you can give us at this point on what can we remove, what can we combine, just like before, the one on the refrigerant, that's great insight. You guys are technical experts, lived experience experts. If you have any thoughts that can kind of help us clean this up for the next phase, that would be really helpful.
Just a general comment, Dawn, I think you guys have done a fantastic job of compiling this information. So
thank you.
good news to you.
Appreciate that. It's funny, so much work went into getting ready for this meeting. And then after the environment one on Monday, I was like, shoot, we thought we did so much to get to this, but now this is really just leading to more work that needs to be done for the next one. There's no end. But it's nice to see that it's evolving, in a productive way.
A simple way might just be to tally the one with the most stars and put it at the top. No, I'm kind of, as being facetious, but that's a place to start.
Yeah.
And maybe you take a look at the ones with the highest combined score. That's how they're ranked, at least on this chart. Intellectually, right?
Yep.
But maybe there are more subjective measures. This objective measure made it easy, and this is another objective measure. Even though one has 1 star and it's got 100 combined score of 100, the one with 3 stars has a combined score of 86. Maybe you give it more credit,
Yep.
Just a thought. You wanted some, that's the first idea that comes to my mind.
Yeah. No, that's an idea for sure.
Another one, the green building one at the very top has 3 stars and it's got a combined score of 122. You maybe put that one at the top, I know that's arbitrary, but you got to start somewhere. And then you have 2 more with 3 stars and one has a slightly higher combined score. I don't know. That's why you've got those objective numbers there. Maybe you can try to get them.
Now, this one on resilient infrastructure, utility resilience, advocate for and require the inclusion of climate resilience measures with clear procedures to combat extreme precipitation and flooding and all Dominion energy infrastructure improvements.
Wow.
So it has 3 stars next to it. Obviously people like it. It has a low combined, it's only 11th percentile compared to all the rest of the strategies. And how do we do that? How does, Office of Sustainability and our Buildings and Energy Working Group, all of you with your organizations, how do we do that? Is that something that we can agree to leave off? Is it already being done somehow?
Yes, because that's why it's got a low combined percentile, probably.
But it has 3 stars next to it. So obviously working group members, want it in there.
Yeah. That's a good point.
But that's where we really need to put that, lens on here. Okay, we like the sound of it, but we do want to set ourselves up for success. Is that really, high scoring or a really important strategy to prioritize over others that might be more impactful?
As defined, it doesn't have much impact and it's hard to achieve. It's not a smart goal, so to speak.
And is Dominion already going to be doing some of those things, that we can just keep an eye on?
Maybe you just try to limit it to 1 or 2 in each objective.
That would be ideal.
That's mighty simple, but I'm thinking we got way too many objectives. Well, we got 4 objectives, but there's a lot of, it seems like there's 14 goals or something. That's a lot. I have a hard time getting to work. I'm exaggerating. You know what I mean?
Right.
Maybe more.
Yeah, you're right.
Simpler to have a very few to which we want to spend a lot of resources.
Yep.
Rather than spread our resources thin over 14 whatever goals there are.
Absolutely.
And maybe you're arbitrary. You got a row of peas and you need one every 4 inches. You pull out 3 of them if you got them every 1 inch. I don't know. Sorry, I'm pulling weeds lately, so that's the most. That's a bad one. Maybe I'll look.
You know, I like this note. Someone says, "Can all of the advocate for items be combined?" You know, maybe there is a kind of a legislative one that we could keep track of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's not an actionable thing other than something for the very distant future.
Something to put in the legislative packet every year and for all of our stakeholders to, you know, advocate for.
Yeah, that's. You still have to rank them though, if you're going to go to the legislature.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to, but you'd want to. You want to, you know, here's the 2 or 3 things we think we ought to think about for the next 5 years. Or 30 years if you're going to be an RVA green. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I'll probably be dead in 30 years. You won't.
It looks like we're getting lots of good feedback on all the strategies, which is great. What to do next is the question.
You've been wrestling with that for some time now.
And I see how other folks are dragging stars up to comments, so feel free to do that as well as you read through the other group's comments.
Mm-hmm.
David, I see that you're back with us. It says your room is failing to open. Did something happen?
No, we just finished up a little early, so jump back.
Great. All right. Well, I don't think rooms are going to automatically close.
Well,
All right. Are we all back in the main room?
Yep,
All right.
I think
Looks like
so.
it.
Or we're coming back.
Great. It looks like we're all back. All right. So how did that go? Any thoughts? Wendy, how was your breakout room?
Great. We had some great minds in my group, so it's interesting to listen to them.
How about you, David?
Yeah, same. It was interesting to see sort of some of the trends that we saw in environment and how they played out here. But yeah, I think some good ideas emerged.
What trends did you see?
So I will paraphrase what Adam said, so Adam, correct me if I did anything wrong, but just thinking about how several of the education and sort of tracking and benchmarking strategies fell below the green, and just thinking about the importance of those in implementing the strategy and where they fit, where those ideas may fit in future discussions, just because those are generally important concepts, and we want to make sure that people know about the programs or initiatives so that they can take advantage of them.
How about anyone from my breakout? Would you like to share any thoughts with the rest of the group? I think one interesting point was, for example, the community solar. There were actually 4 of them. 3 of them made the cut, 1 did not. But maybe they should just be combined into one about community solar and encourage community solar through zone actions, incentivizing opportunities, and increasing funding for microgrids. And I think it's really interesting. You know, you guys put so much work into creating these objectives and strategies, and now that we're looking at them together and trying to organize them for what's next, I think there is opportunity for combining some of the things that fell out. They could roll up underneath. Any others? So I'm really looking to you guys for some guidance, because between this meeting and the next meeting, staff is basically going to have to look at all of this and think about, you know, how we can combine them, or what can we do without. One example from our group of one that we could easily do without is education. Well, actually, Irina, why don't you go ahead and speak to that? Are you there?
Hey, I'm here, sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, so the State Air Pollution Control Board just a couple weeks ago voted on a measure to phase out HFC production and distribution in Virginia over the next few years. And Virginia is the first state in the South to get on the HFC ban.
It's kind of like an easy out that, we know it's already happening, or someone else is already doing it really well and we don't need to elevate it to one of our priorities. That would be really helpful. So please go ahead and, drag those X's up, put the notes in the comments, or just speak up now. Let us know. We're happy to make the comments for you.
So Dawn, this is Ed. Maybe one way to combine them was a lot of these strategies seem to be like they're tactics. They're very specific. Solar microgrids. That's not even a tactic. That's a very specific one thing we can do. It's an objective. It's actionable, but maybe a strategy would be like you said, combine the solar stuff. This is our strategy. This is one way to reduce greenhouse gas production.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking at ways to eliminate. So I think the HFCs was a way to eliminate. This is a way to combine and have fewer objectives, or rather, fewer items within the objective.
Right. Right.
Just an observation.
No, that's great. Another one our group saw was the objective 4, and how a lot of these, net zero energy design, resilient design guidelines, solar readiness, utility resilience, all had an equity rating that fell at the bottom of the rankings. And that's because they got ones or lows among each of the community priorities. But maybe, that was a good observation, because maybe that just means that it doesn't seem like these new construction would apply to low-income housing, for example. That's not necessarily the case. If we're trying to get at, new low-income housing, we might want to add that in and make it a requirement.
Enforcement and design guidelines and things like that, when they scored low on equity, that was sort of misguided to me, because we're building lots of low income, actually, that is already, all the low income tax credit housing in Virginia for a decade has there are incentives out there that need to be better communicated, better augmented, and strengthened. Point 2 is the market rate stuff that's being built today will be the lower income housing of the future. And so we need to build in that high energy efficiency, the solar readiness, etc., so that the folks who get it in 10, 20, 30 years aren't burdened with an overly obsolete building. And and further, all these strategies, some people have heard me say this many times, but if you roll the efficiency upgrades and even the solar into your mortgage, for most people, that will be a net positive for your household if you can roll these costs into the mortgage and then pay less on your utility bills. You're actually saving money. So people are paying a penalty. We are exacerbating inequities when we fail to do these things. That is true yesterday. Mm-hmm. So that, I just see sort of a a misunderstanding of the facts on the ground when, I see low impact from code enforcement or from building code upgrades or solar.
Yeah, good point.
That's leaving money on the ground right now.
Jeff Crawford, did you have something? I see a hand raised.
Yeah, and just to share something Wendy, Andrew, and our group talked about is as a city for municipal buildings, talking about earlier, we're talking about where they do the repairs for DPW for vehicles. We have this beautiful big flat spot that has, good solar potential, but we didn't have the forethought to build it structurally so that we could add. So now we're going around looking for opportunities to implement solar and going, well, we didn't build it solar ready. So now, and at some point we need to, say from here on, if not everybody in the city, but us as a city government, we are going to be forward thinking in being able to implement solar, or else eventually people aren't going to build to that spec and we aren't going to be able to implement this when solar becomes cheaper and more accessible. We need to have not green rooftop ready, but PV ready.
Great.
Well said.
Thank you. All right, so any other thoughts on this activity? Strategies in particular? So we're going to go ahead and leave this this document open for the rest of the week. Feel free to go back in, make any additional comments, react to what's been elevated and what has fell below. With that, I am going to wrap up. So our next meeting is June 16th at 11, and that's when we're going to move into, we're going to clean up this list of strategies that are going to move forward, and we're going to start addressing the indicators and impacts of each of them. And so that'll be a real interesting discussion and work group activity. So general reflections on where we are. Anyone have any questions for us on this process in general? Thank you for joining us on the learning journey. This has been really interesting process. Grateful for all of you hanging in there with us. There is a survey, the same feedback survey we ask you to fill out after every meeting that just really helps us to kind of get a sense of what's working, what's not, what we could be doing better, where you, how you feel about the work we're doing. And it helps us do better next time. And if you have any updates that you want to share with the group, now's the time. Feel free to put them in the slide, the second slide, or in the chat, and staff can respond. Anything you want to share?
Thanks.
Okay, well then you are free to go, and we'll see you in a few weeks, and enjoy your day.
Thanks, Dawn.
Thank you all.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.